Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started. Welcome. I'm Shira Danzig, co-founder of River Psychology Group, and we're so glad you're here for today's workshop about birth trauma, postpartum healing, and bonding with your baby. For anyone who's new to us, River Psychology Group is a group practice co-founded by me and Dr. Dahlia Kaufman, who's also here with us today. And we have offices in Scarsdale and Westchester and Park Slope, Brooklyn. And we also provide virtual care throughout New York State. We work with clients across the lifespan, including children and teens, but a core part of our work is supporting women throughout pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum period. So our goal today is to create a space to talk openly about the emotional difficulties that can arise after a challenging birth experience, and to offer tools that can support healing and strengthen your connection with your baby. I'm so excited to introduce our presenter, Golda Fleischman, a perinatal therapist in our group, and a birth doula whose work is grounded in trauma-informed care. Golda will walk us through what birth trauma can look like, how it can impact emotional well-being and bonding, and practical ways to support yourself as you heal. We're going to mute everyone, so feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat as we go, and Golda will leave a little time at the end to answer as many as she can. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Golda to get us started.
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Shira. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Thank you all for being here. As Shira mentioned, my name is Golda Fleischman. I'm a perinatal therapist at the River Psychology Group, and I'm also a donor certified birth doula. And today we'll talk about processing birth trauma. I am going to draw a lot of my experiences as a birth doula throughout this talk. And I want to highlight that we will be talking about birth trauma. So if this is too soon for you to listen to this, please be honest with yourself and come back to this later. The second part of our talk is going to be about bonding with your baby, because regardless of whether you had a traumatic birth, sometimes this is challenging. So why this conversation matters. Research shows that up to 1 in 3 women describe their birth experience as traumatic. 1 in 5 women experience some kind of mistreatment during their birth. And even when our babies are healthy, the emotional and psychological impact can last for months and even years. So by opening up this conversation, our goal is to help parents recognize trauma rather than just dismissing it as a bad birth. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to define what birth trauma is. We're going to understand how it shows up both emotionally and physically. We're going to explore strategies for healing and processing. And then separately, we'll talk about ways to bond with your baby. So what is birth trauma? Birth trauma refers to the birthing woman's experiences of interactions and/or events directly related to childbirth that cause overwhelming and distressing emotions, leading to short and/or long-term negative impacts to the birthing woman's health, well-being, and relationships. I want to highlight a few things. First of all, this is a subjective definition. It is the birthing woman's perception or experience of care. So sometimes I was at a birth and I thought everything went beautifully, and the mom had a different experience. And the same birth can be experienced differently by 2 different people. Sometimes I found the doctor to be pushy, and that actually was comforting to the mom. We also have to notice that women of color are at an increased risk for traumatic birth because of systemic disparities in obstetric care. And a challenging birth can reactivate prior stress or trauma connected to a person's lived experiences of racism. And for people with a history of sexual violence, a challenging birth experience can bring up old trauma, especially if they feel out of control or unsafe. And a traumatic birth can directly impact your functioning and your well-being. Now, sometimes birth doesn't go the way we imagined, and that can happen even when everybody in the room, the parents, the midwives, the doctors, the nurses, the doulas, everyone did their very best. I was at a birth where after the baby was born, the baby stopped breathing. And everyone left the room traumatized, the parents and all the professionals. And nobody did anything wrong. It wasn't anybody's fault. We know that birth is unpredictable, and even with the best care in the world, the experience can be frightening and overwhelming. On the other hand, there are invasive and painful treatments, and these might look like breaking the water without permission, repeated vaginal checks, an episiotomy, or forceps or vacuum. I've never been at a birth where an episiotomy was performed, but I have had clients who reported that they have had them, and not everybody who's had them sees that as traumatic. Again, going back to that subjective definition that we talked about. But I was at a birth where it took a while for the epidural to wear off and for the mom to kind of like learn how to push effectively. There was a doctor there with a medical student, and he wanted to teach her how to do a vacuum delivery. So at some point, the doctor said, pushing is not working, and he took out the vacuum. And after the birth, when I went back and processed it with the mom, she had really liked her doctor and had a lot of respect for him, but she realized that the vacuum was not necessary. And she realized how invasive that was. And she said to me, like, the vacuum had failed, I would have ended up in a C-section, and there was no reason for that. Loss of autonomy can look like being shouted at, scolded, threatened, or even just being ignored. I had a mom who, as she was being wheeled into a C-section, the doctor told her that if things didn't go well, she would lose her uterus. Disrespect can include being denied pain relief. Mothers have experienced separation from their babies, feeling overwhelming pain, feeling pushed, abandoned, alone, and being yelled at. The mother whose baby stopped breathing, it was a home birth, and then she transferred over to the hospital because they wanted to admit the baby, but they wanted to admit the baby and leave mom out of the hospital. So she had to advocate for herself, for her right to remain with the baby. Now, think about this. She's just gone through a birth. She's just gone through a trauma. And now she has to like get the energy out to try to advocate for her right to remain with the baby. I was at another birth, and the doctor didn't want to wait for the placenta to detach. So he manually reached in and removed it. And I don't know if anybody's had this experience or seen this happen, but it is extremely painful. And then once the placenta is out, the provider has to check it to make sure that it's entirely removed. If it isn't, you have to go back, you have to get an ultrasound, figure out where the membranes are, go back in and remove those membranes. And again, that's another painful procedure. And then after that, mom has to be put on antibiotics because of all the, rummaging around inside her body. And sometimes we're really grateful that we have this technology and it's amazing. But other times it's just an impatient doctor. So here are some quotes from women. I was treated like nothing. I felt raped and my dignity was taken from me. I hated being shouted at by my midwife. She was abusive and downright mean. These quotes come from this study called the Giving Voice to Mothers. And they found that out of a group of women, 1 in 4 reported being shouted at or scolded by their healthcare practitioner. 1 in 10 were threatened. 1 in 7 were ignored. And out of a group of women that transferred to the hospital from a home birth, almost half of them reported that they were treated poorly because of their decision to have a home birth. So here are a few psychological reactions. This isn't going to be an exhaustive list. It would be impossible to go through all possible reactions, but these are some common ones. A big one is guilt. A lot of people have these like what if thoughts, like what would have happened if I didn't have an epidural, if I held out for longer, or maybe if I had the epidural earlier. Some people feel like I didn't push hard enough, or I gave up too soon and agreed to a C-section. Sometimes people feel like they should have known that something was wrong earlier. Another what if thought is like, what would have happened if I chose a different doctor or midwife or hospital? Would things have been different? A big one is my body failed to do what it was supposed to. And another one is I panicked and made things worse. And these are all just examples of this tendency to obsessively replay events and start looking for that exact moment when something went wrong. Or some people feel responsible for medical outcomes that were completely beyond their control. Some people find themselves minimizing the trauma, like saying, oh, it wasn't so bad, because they would feel guilt if they acknowledge that they actually suffered trauma. Another big feeling is that my body failed. Anxiety can look like intrusive thoughts, which are really common. And a lot of people find themselves imagining that their baby stops breathing while they sleep. And that might mean that a person constantly checks on their baby throughout the night. Some people visualize accidental harm, like they see themselves dropping their baby or the baby slipping into the bath water. Some people visualize horrible things happening to their baby, even though they have no intention and they would never want that to happen. And some people have panic when somebody else holds their baby, and that can be paired with mental images of seeing their baby hurt. Hypervigilance can look like that constant monitoring of your baby, and it might be more than just sleep. You might monitor your baby's temperature or feeding, and just this like general feeling of not being able to relax. Another common reaction is anger. Some people are angry at their birth team for making them feel rushed or dismissed. Some people are angry that the birthing class they took didn't prepare them for the outcome. Some people are just angry at everybody or at themselves. And these are just very typical reactions if you've had a traumatic birth. Then there are physical symptoms, and we have to remember that after trauma, our body is still dealing with the trauma, so our nervous system is still in this hyper-aroused state. It's acting as if the danger is still there. The physical symptoms might be like persistent pain in your abdomen, your pelvis, where the incision was. You might have headache and fatigue. You might have rapid heartbeat and palpitations or shortness of breath, and just generally feeling like you can't get a full breath in. You might have muscle tension, especially in your neck and shoulders, maybe in your jaw. You might have stomach issues like nausea, diarrhea, loss of appetite. There might be sweating, trembling, dizziness when you think about the birth. Some people have the startle response, like they jump easily at noises, and some people have sleep disturbances that looks like insomnia or nightmares or just even restless sleep. Breastfeeding sometimes feels like the only thing that we can control after we've had a traumatic birth. And some people feel like my body failed me during the birth, and a big fear is like, what if it fails again during feeding? So for some people, this shows up as like constantly worrying about their milk supply or their baby's weight, even if medical professionals tell us the baby's fine. Some people feel this pressure to breastfeed to prove that they're a good parent. Some people feel guilt or shame if they need to supplement or switch to formula. And some people find themselves comparing themselves to others who seem to breastfeed easily. And then they feel defective about it. And some people try to be perfect at breastfeeding to try to kind of fix whatever went wrong with the birth. And they work really hard at this, and that can be really taxing on them, and it can lead to burnout. Society often tells us, well, at least your baby is healthy. And this is a well-intentioned message, but it does invalidate our pain. Our birth trauma can alter our sense of self. It can leave us feeling broken and less capable, disconnected from our identity as women and as mothers. It can leave us doubting our strength or our worthiness. And we might feel this pressure to appear fine because nobody can see our wound. So the invisible part of the trauma lives in the space between how we appear and how we actually feel inside. I once visited a mom after giving birth, and she just looked a little too put together. And I worried because, like, if after giving birth you're not sleep deprived or leaking milk, or it's not a big effort to take a shower, then something is being covered up and something's not being addressed. So We have to remember that birth is maybe the biggest thing that has ever happened and will ever happen to us, and we might feel really bad about the way it unfolded. Now, birth trauma doesn't just affect one person. It can ripple through our relationships. Some parents feel disconnected from their babies or their partners. Other people withdraw because they don't want to burden their loved ones. Some partners feel helpless. And we'll talk about partners in a minute. But let's just acknowledge that dynamic. And by knowing that this is very typical, we might start reducing our shame and isolation. Now, partners who have witnessed a difficult birth may experience secondary trauma. This is a big topic, and we don't have enough time to talk about this, but just know that the same feelings you have, your partner might also have, and the feelings might be of helplessness and fear, maybe even guilt, and their symptoms might look the same. It might be similar physical and psychological symptoms. And really, I would urge you to have a conversation about this. Maybe you can maintain your connection, and maybe you can even deepen it. And you can say something like, how's it been for you since the birth? So how do we heal? Healing begins with naming what happened. It's okay to grieve the birth that you hoped for. Acknowledging that doesn't erase the trauma, but it does create the space for healing to begin. So here are some different paths to heal. We're going to go over these briefly, but the goal in whatever method you choose is to help you learn that your body is safe and to help you integrate the experience so you can start to make sense of what happened. You might seek support from a therapist, and the idea is to help you restore a sense of safety to both your body and mind. You might focus on peer and community support groups and hear other stories, just to hear that me too. And that helps us feel less alone sometimes, but the focus should be on that, on hearing other people's stories and not comparing your story to others. We know that trauma lives in the body, so if you do choose to do more of a body-based healing method like gentle yoga or mindful breathing, that would be to help our body learn that it's safe again. And then there's a narrative and creative processing. We know that creativity gives our nervous system a way to integrate the story, whether we use words or other methods. And it's just to make meaning out of our experiences. And I also, you don't owe anybody an explanation of what happened. And sharing your story before you're ready can actually be overwhelming and maybe even re-traumatizing. So if you're not ready to share it, set boundaries around it. You could say something like, I'm still processing and not ready to talk about it, or thanks for asking. I'm struggling and appreciate you checking in on me, and I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk. So the second part of our talk is about bonding with your baby. And this can be a consequence of birth trauma, but even people who don't have a traumatic birth sometimes have a feeling of detachment from their baby. So this could look like looking at your baby and not feeling this intense feeling of love that you thought you'd feel. You might find yourself going through the motions of feeding, changing, and rocking your baby, but just feel like you're watching yourself from the distance. You might feel numb, indifferent, overwhelmed, or maybe resentful. And this can be really confusing, especially if you really wanted this baby. So know that this is common. It doesn't mean that you're broken. Not feeling instantly bonded with your baby doesn't mean that you're a bad parent or that you're not capable of love. And know that bonding is a process. It builds through small daily interactions. So I would urge you to be patient. It doesn't always happen right away, but it grows through those little moments that we share with our babies. So give yourself some space. And then also, you matter in this process. If you feel rested and supported, it's so much easier to be present. So try to be kind to yourself. And here are some practical things you can do. Skin-to-skin contact, like just putting your baby on your chest, It fosters that oxytocin, the feel-good hormone release, and it fosters connection as well. And some people worry because they miss the first hours or days or weeks, and that's okay. It's not too late to start. Facial expressions, our babies really love our faces, and they learn so much just by watching us. So just like if you smile at your baby or raise your eyebrows or even just make eye contact, that goes a long way. You can talk to your baby, you can tell your baby what you're doing or even just how you're feeling, and that has that builds that relationship and attachment, but it also might help you calm down. Another thing you could do is get help. So that might look like somebody else can take care of you while you take care of the baby. So maybe somebody can fold laundry, clean your house, cook for you, or maybe somebody else can take care of the baby and then you could take a shower or take a nap and just kind of rest and recover. I want to introduce this concept of a good enough mother. It's coined by Donald Winnicott, who is a very influential psychoanalyst, and he talked about the good enough mother. So the good enough mother shows up and she offers love that's real, but not flawless. You don't have to be perfect. Our babies don't need perfection. They just need us to be present. And you don't have to have all the answers, and you don't have to love every moment. An authentic mother probably won't get it right every time. An authentic mother makes room for mistakes and then repair. You can love in small, steady, imperfect ways. You don't have to be extraordinary to be exactly what your baby needs. You just have to be good enough, and you already are. Before we end, I want to leave you with some resources. I think Cheryl will put them in the chat. Two organizations that we like are Postpartum Support International and Birth Trauma Association. They have great resources. They can connect you to online or WhatsApp groups. There's two podcasts, Breaking the Taboo and Mom in Mind. And they kind of talk about a lot of the stuff we talked about today. Some books. Good Moms Have Scary Thoughts. It's an illustrated guide, so it's a little easy to read if you're in a fog of sleeplessness. But it kind of normalizes the intrusive, overwhelming, and frightening thoughts that a lot of moms have. And Healing After Birth has like very practical, reflective exercises that can be helpful. Then there's this book, When Survivors Give Birth. It's by the two founders of DONA, and it talks about the effects of trauma on childbirth. And the book has some good communication skills and self-help techniques. So I'm going to look at some questions that you guys put in the chat. But before I do that, I want to end with a reminder that you're not broken, you're healing. And processing birth trauma is about reclaiming your story and your power. So hang on while I take a peek at the questions. Okay, so some questions we got was somebody asked about how to work on their marriage while bonding with their baby. So I wanted to point out that early parenthood is not the time to look at the state of your marriage. It's a really hard time, and it might be helpful to acknowledge how challenging this time is. So if you can name the experience as a difficult one, that might be good enough for now. So just give yourself some grace to accept how challenging a time this is. Somebody else wrote in and asked whether their trauma counted as a birth trauma. And if you go back to when we went to the definition, we talked about it being a subjective definition. So if your experience was traumatic, then it was traumatic. And I would urge you to believe in yourself. We can say like, it didn't feel good. And if we can start to accept that and hear our own truth, we might be able to start moving forward and begin the healing process. Somebody else wrote in and asked about bonding with their baby in the NICU, and this is a huge topic. So we can't go into all of it, but I just want to notice that NICU is a really traumatic and very scary time, and we need to accept that. And you just do what you can to make that connection. And there's going to be time when you bring your baby home and you can start having the bonding experiences that you wanted to have, but do what you can now to create that connection. And whatever you do, even if it feels not enough, it's still valuable and important. So I'm going to turn this back to Shira. I did put my contact information here so you can reach out if you'd like to talk further. Before I do, I want to thank you all for being part of this conversation and for all of you doing your part in making birth experiences more compassionate and more humane.
Thank you, Golda. That was so fantastic. It was, I learned a lot, even though I've been working with this population for many years as well. So I wanted to thank you all for spending this time with us today. I know it's really hard on a Friday to take out a few minutes to spend learning about something. So we really appreciate you being here. And we'll add Golda's contact information as well as our River Psychology Group contact information in the chat as well. And we'll be sharing a recording of this talk on our website and also through email for anyone who couldn't join us live. And you'll all of you who are here today will also receive a recording. And we're wishing you a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend. Bye, everyone.